Welcome. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today for our webinar. Delighted that you could be here. I'm Pam Gothart. I'm Director of Professional Learning with Active Classroom, Social Studies School Service, and Nystrom Education. And it's a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to speak with you today. In addition to me being with you today, I have with us author and teacher Michael Hutchison. And Michael is going to be sharing with us about Freedom, A History of Us, and the close reading activities that he has designed for Joy Hakum's book. And I will be sharing with you just a little bit more about Michael in a moment. But for now, just to let you know that we are recording today's session, and it will be able to be used with people who are not able to join us live. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for being online with me today. And let me just jump right on in and tell you that what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at freedom and where it is found in Active Classroom. And then Michael's going to come online and join us, and he's going to talk to us about close reading, how it works, and why we want to use close reading with our students. He had some wonderful ideas and techniques to show you today. So I want to go ahead and just show you, though, where you can find Freedom, A History of Us by Joy Hakum. You do have to be subscribed to either U.S. History or Government Civics to have this particular title. As you can see, once I've gotten into Active Classroom, I've come over to my series title section, and I've clicked on Freedom, A History of Us, and I've pulled up the list of topics within Freedom, A History of Us. And as you can see, it's broken down into kind of like chapters, but it's more like sections. And for our first section here, we have independence. And if I click on independence, that's going to open up, and we're going to be able to see the readings that are available in independence. First of all, Freedom Independence has several sections. We're going to start with July 4, American Farmer, A Taxing King, and as you can see, we have a subset. And then when we go down here, we see here's our close reading activity. And if I click on close reading activity, I'm going to find that this particular activity that has been created comes from Independence, a Continental Congress, and a Continental Army, and it's particularly working with the last paragraph. So I can come over here and see Freedom, Independence. I'm going to go down to a Continental Congress and a Continental Army. And I can see from joining that Michael has taken this last paragraph here, and this is the paragraph from which he has developed the close reading activity. So to find your close reading activities, you're going to come into Freedom, A History of Us, and each of those sections has a close reading activity at the moment, and there will be more populated with them very soon. So I'm looking forward to, like I said, having Michael online with us today. He is a high school teacher in Indiana, and he is also a frequent contributor to Active Classroom. He's also written a couple of books on the subject of conquering close reading with Joy Hakum's book, Freedom. He's also done a number of writing pieces for PBS for series such as The War, The Roosevelts, and the Civil War, to name just a few. Michael is a very active writer, and we are very fortunate to have him with us today. So what I want to do now is I want to put Michael online and let him take control of the screen so that we can go ahead and get into what he wants to share with us today about close reading. So Michael, I'm going to unmute you there, and then I also want to share my screen with you, or let you take control of the screen.
Okay, Pam.
I'm going to just click on that. Well, I am trying to do that anyway, Michael. I tell you what, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up on my screen, Michael, and that way I'm not wasting any more time since I've already done that a little bit today.
Okay, sure, not a problem.
I'll pull it up on mine, and you can tell me how you want to progress through there.
Okay, Pam, the way this is set up is it's just if you just push the space bar or advance, and it should just be, it just appears. So I'll just go ahead and start. First of all, please excuse my Hoosier twang. I'm located in Vincennes, Indiana, which is in the southwest corner of the state. For you people who are basketball fans, I'm about 90 minutes west of Indiana University, about 3 hours south of Purdue, and about 4 to 5 hours southwest of Notre Dame. So if you're following anything with the NCAA, you've got an idea where I am. First of all, you know, as Pam mentioned, I've done some work with close reading. About this time last year, I was approached to write a couple of books dealing with Joy Hakum's Freedom series as far as what can we do with close reading. And I agreed to do that, and the first thing that I realized that I had to do was I had to find out, well, what in the world is exactly close reading? So Pam, if you'll go ahead and advance, what close reading is I'm going to go back one. Okay, close reading refers to basically a careful and purposeful reading of a selection of a text with the goal of discovering deeper comprehension and an understanding of the material. So when you think about it, it's kind of what, you know, we did as college students. I can't see, Pam, you probably have a better idea than I do how many people are actually online at this point, but you know, when we began, you know, our journey as far as undergrads or grads, as far as elementary teachers or secondary teachers, you know, we knew we would have to do a lot of comprehensive, very intense reading, and to be honest, I'm not sure a lot of us were really that prepared for it. Well, close reading kind of begins that journey for us. So if you'll go to the next slide, Pam. So let's talk about why we want to teach our students close reading. Why do we want them to develop that skill? So the first bullet, if you'll just go ahead and click ahead, it's rooted, as I mentioned, in secondary level learning, especially preparing students for college level courses. The advent of Common Core and language arts standards made that evident that close reading skills were needed on the middle school and elementary level. In other words, we weren't really doing, at least I don't think I was, doing a very effective job of trying to help my students understand how to read a text for meaningful and deep understanding. Okay, would you go to the next bullet? So as I mentioned, the goal is deep comprehension. It's necessary as students move from lower level to upper level text, which again occurs as students move from elementary and secondary to higher education. So as you all know, you know, the more and more pressure is put on our students to read effectively and learn how to read effectively, and certainly that's the goal that we want. So Pam, go ahead to the next slide, please. So let's talk about how close reading works, the idea of, you know, what we do and how it works. So go ahead to the next bullet. So the way we start is a student is given a short excerpt from a text, for example, Joy Hakum's Freedom. From that point, the teacher develops a short activity set using these, the excerpts. So what we try to do in the books is we tried to limit that to about an excerpt, a paragraph of roughly about 150 words for elementary and middle school level, to about 250, should be words, not words, for secondary level. And the next bullet would say that these activities would generally run somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes in length. So if you'll go ahead to the next slide, Pam, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some time and just give you some ideas of close reading strategies that we actually use in conquering close reading. I will admit, as I mentioned, a lot of this, were things that I had to learn, as well as things that I, had to impart in the book as well. So, for example, identifying anecdotes, a brief story about an interesting event or occurrence. I suppose another way to look at that is probably some of you are like me as a history teacher. I'm kind of interested in historical trivia. So, something that would catch a student's eye about something in an event that happened that made it more interesting or more relevant or however. Okay, the next one is chunking the text. When we chunk the text, what we do is we ask the student to divide the reading into smaller, more manageable pieces with a common thread or each in something in common. The next one is to compare and contrast. So what we're looking for there, similarities and differences. So it's not a really good example, but like, for example, people have often compared facts about the Kennedy assassination and the Lincoln assassination. What's similar there? What are some of the the things that are kind of unique about both, or maybe some of the differences as well? Another one, craft and structure. How does the author use syntax in order to effectively convey his, or in this case, her message? And then finally on this slide, evidence. We all know what evidence is. Evidence is proof. So it's something that proves a particular point or a particular idea. What exactly is the author trying to show us, and how does he or she prove that point? So let's go on to some other examples. Another one is what's called a 5-word summary. Now, in a 5-word summary, what the student does is they take the 5 most important word in an excerpt, and they defend why they think those choices of words are the most important. Now, you'll notice, I think probably, obviously we want to look at what the student actually writes here, but in addition, the goal is they have to get those words by more intense, close reading. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the student to read, reread, and maybe even reread a third time. Okay, the next one is frame of reference. What information is there, or what values can we use to just show us how did the author particularly reach this particular judgment or this particular conclusion? What's their frame of reference? So, for example, someone like, say me, who grew up in the 1960s, I might be able to have a different frame of reference for things about Martin Luther King, for example, than I would, say, someone. I noticed Pam was showing you about John Adams and the Revolutionary War. Obviously, my frame of reference with that would be somewhat different. So, keeping on that slide, an inference. So, the author makes a conclusion which is based on evidence and reasoning. As you probably know, when we're talking about history, it's difficult sometimes for an author not to have a particular slant or bend on a particular particular event and what they're writing about, and certainly that's common for about any historical work at all. But how does the author make the conclusion about what he or she believes, whether it's about letters from a Birmingham jail, or something with Reconstruction or whatever. Okay, then the last one on this slide is irony. It's intentionally contrary to what is expected. It's kind of opposite to what the meaning is, and sometimes that's used for humorous effect. So an example of irony could be something along the line of that. Say, for example, if you were doing a work, writing about, say, Orson Welles and War of the Worlds, the effect, what happened, was obviously different and totally unintentional to what Orson Welles believed it would have, the effect would have, and it had an entirely different meaning to it. So let's go on to the next slide, Pam. Liberal understanding. With that, we want the students to maybe use their own viewpoint. Obviously, we want them to use evidence. We want them to be able to, use the conclusions that they're able to make their own viewpoint. Like, for example, does the student agree or disagree with what the author says about, say, the war in Iraq? Something along that line. With metaphor. It's a descriptive word or a phrase that's used to represent or explain something else. Of course, we'll talk about a simile in just a minute. The main difference is with a metaphor, you don't use the word like or as. Paradox is a statement that appears to contradict itself, but ultimately proves to be true. So, like for example, like Lyndon Johnson believed that his administration would be the Great Society, but events, soon change, and the paradox is that he finds himself being not a liberal, progressive president, but a war president, and how that, and what the inference you can make from that. With point of view is a perspective that's taken by an author. So, again, I can't see who all's online, or I don't know anything about your background, but again, as someone, in my situation from the 1960s and 1970s, my point of view about, say, John F. Kennedy, or my point of view about Richard Nixon may be very different than, say, what someone who was born in the 1980s or 1990s would have. The last one on this slide is primary historic source. A primary source comes directly from the past, someone who witnessed the event firsthand. So if you're familiar with Diary of Anne Frank, that is a primary historic source. Anne Frank lived the Holocaust. She was an eyewitness, so we can pretty much, although obviously we have to have frame of reference ideas there and all that, we know that what she writes, she saw it firsthand. Okay, the next slide. Pull quotes refer to, and probably everybody in here has seen this at one point in time or another, in regard to magazines or newspapers where the editor of the paper, or the editor of the magazine, or the layout editor will take a quote, a small bit of text from the story, and will make it a larger font size, and usually do it in boldface, so it grabs the reader's attention. So the reader sees that pull quote, and then they can simply look at that and they can say, oh, I really want to read this story. Well, what we ask students to do is very similar. What is it that would be something they would include as a pull quote? With read with a pencil, what we want the students to do is to annotate the text. In other words, to use a pencil or a highlighter, marking key points, and to annotate. Okay. A rhetorical praesis. I have to admit I had never heard of this until I attended a workshop in Indianapolis last summer, and it was on C3 about college and career readiness standards. So when I saw that, I thought, I've got to use this with the reading examples that we're doing with Joy Hakem. And what a rhetorical praesis is just a 4-sentence, it's a detailed syllabus about, or synthesis, excuse me, about an informational text. So what we want the students to do with this is basically we want them to say what the author's name is, the title of the selection, and a concise, appropriate verb like asserts, argues, whatever, that essentially says what this is about. Then we want a sentence about how does the author support the thesis, why the author wrote the selection, and should contain an in order to statement, and in the last one should address what was the intended audience. Secondary source is a secondary source that relates past events but wasn't produced by an eyewitness. Again, as a history teacher, I can tell you things about the Holocaust, but I obviously was not an eyewitness, so I can't tell you what I saw when I was at Dachau or Auschwitz, because I wasn't there. But people like Anne Frank can. So it doesn't mean that what I'm telling you is not important or not acceptable or not a verifiable source. It just is that I am not an eyewitness. Okay, what a simile is, it's a figure of speech that compares two different things, like with words like or as, which we use quite a bit. So we ask the students to look for similes. Syntax is the manner in which the author tries to arrange words and form sentences. So we ask the student to highlight what's the most important sentence in the paragraph, and then what are keywords that help demonstrate that main theme. So we ask them to do the key sentence, the main sentence, in one color, and then we might ask them to do the others in another color. With a thesis, it's a statement or a premise. What is to be proven? So, we've all done that before, whether it's in science or, in history or whatever. And then, of course, we also want the students to know a little bit about vocab. So what we tend to do is we use like either matching or word banks, and we ask the students to basically define what the words mean. Okay, as far as some final examples, I threw a lot at you in just a short amount of time. A word picture is a graphic or vivid description in words. How do the words paint a picture in your mind of what exactly the author is trying to tell you about this particular event, this particular era? I don't, unless you have read the book, you probably haven't read about, for example, how Joy Haycom describes the Kennedy assassination, for example. She paints a very vivid word picture about what happened that day in Dallas. So, you know, she tries to help the kids understand what that was like from the angle of that she knows they weren't eyewitnesses. She was. I was. Then the last one is what you would call wrecking the text, which is student just essentially looks at a passage and rewrites that passage in his or her own words. So let's end up by talking about some advantages to close reading. Why do we want to do this? And again, I apologize for throwing a lot at you at this short amount of time. Pam and I will allow, definitely entertain questions as we get farther into the webinar this afternoon. One of the main things is students gain skills in more effective reading and comprehension. That is a huge, huge issue as we move ahead into what we expect our students to be able to do as far as reading, adhering to standards, whatever. In Indiana, for example, we require that students be allowed to read at a third grade level when they're in third grade, or else they cannot advance to fourth grade. So the more we can teach them about close reading, then the better off we are. They can hone those reading skills that benefit them through their school careers. I will admit, and probably many of you can agree, that I thought I read relatively well until I got into a lot of intensive reading in college, and then I realized, hey, I don't read nearly as well as maybe I could or should. And then also the final advantage is teachers can be assured that students are more effectively reading content, and they're retaining that information. So there's a lot of major advantages to close reading. We just have to develop the skills. I don't know if Pam has, if you go to the next slide, Pam, I don't know if you have contact information, but if anyone here has any questions that you can't get in through the session tonight and you would like to contact me directly, there's my contact information as far as my email address, and Pam's is there also. So please don't hesitate. If there's anything that I can explain to you, if I didn't explain it very thoroughly tonight, I would be more than happy to. So
wonderful, Michael. Fantastic. Michael, I definitely want us to have a little bit more of a conversation about some of that, and we also want to open up for questions in just a moment. I'm going to just go back a screen. I'm going to tell you, I was working with some teachers just this week doing some professional development, and one of the things the teacher said to me is, we ask students to read, but we're just never sure that they really read what we've asked. And I think you honed in on that so well when you talked about how this close reading helps teachers to know that the students actually read and retained something from that, rather than just saying, hey, read this page tonight for homework. If we have one of these close reading activities attached to that, then we as teachers can feel a little more assured that, hey, they actually did read it, and here's a little bit of that proof from that. And they come to class a little more prepared for whatever type of engagement you have prepared for that day.
I agree.
So I have a question. There are so many more close reading activities than I realized. I'm just going to be honest. I'm familiar with close reading. I knew a few of these, but you really went into some that I had not really considered as being close reading activities, so it was very enlightening for me. Out of all of these different types that you've shared, how many of these have you used with Joy Haycom's book in Freedom that we can experience now through Active Classroom?
Well, I would say definitely the rhetorical process is, for me as a high school teacher, and I teach primarily juniors and seniors, so I have upper level secondary kids. The rhetorical praesis is one that I've used, and definitely the frame of reference activities would be another one that I've used quite a bit. Now, as far as using Joy's material, that I like the way that she does. She how do I say, writes to a particular audience. I don't know if you've mentioned this before, Pam, or if anybody who's in the audience has ever had a chance to really look at the material there. But the fact that she tells it kind of more like a story than a typical history textbook would. So so I've used some of the things at this point for the 1920s. Which I ended up first semester. I had, to be honest, a little bit of an advantage over anybody else in the audience because I had, the original activities because I had my original copies. And then, I have used a couple for, matter of fact, I have some at school right now that I haven't used yet for World War II. But I think we used close reading regardless. We just didn't realize it was close reading. The question is, how effectively did we use it?
That's excellent. And I noticed one of the things as you were going through the slides about close reading and the importance of being able to annotate and write on the reading itself and to highlight within that. And of course, in active classroom, that's one of those best characteristics about our active reader is that you can go in there and annotate in the margin. You can have students highlight that important vocabulary, and I believe it's Robert Marzano who said that 55% or more of a student's essential vocabulary comes from social studies. It means we are hugely important to the growth of vocabulary for our students, and not just having them look at a word and define it, they've written it, and that's fine, we're ready to move on, but to really understand that vocabulary and how it fits into the context of a reading. So I'm very excited about all this.